everybody, it's Eugene Lee Show, and welcome to episode 58 of Forensics Talks. And today we have Dan Nash is going to speak to us about human trafficking. Now, before I get started, as always, in the chat window, make sure that if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them in, and then we'll be able to see them here. And I'll do my best to vet them and make sure if there's any good questions, I'll pass them forward to our guest today. Also, a couple of things just to add. There is one of the training courses I've got coming up, which is the Cloud Compare course. We just finished the photogrammetry course about a week ago, and so that went really well. And this is one that a lot of people have already pre-registered for, wanting to know when it's on. So here it is, March 22nd and 23rd. That's coming up very soon. So if you are interested, go ahead and just go to my website, the ai2-3d.com, and then you can find out all the information there. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I think we're just going to jump in today. So my guest today is Dan Nash, and he's a retired Missouri State Trooper, and he spent 27 years investigating narcotics, vice crimes, violent crime, and human trafficking. Dan was the sergeant of the Human Trafficking Unit and the enforcement supervisor of the Missouri Attorney General's Office Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, and he's the co-founder of the Human Trafficking Training Center. Dan has instructed human trafficking training in numerous states for law enforcement, victim advocates, casinos, firefighters, hospitals, and nationwide nonprofits. He's created the special victims methodology for investigating human trafficking cases, which is being used by many law enforcement agencies. Dan has also spoken at many conferences on human trafficking, and he's passionate about improving the anti-trafficking program within law enforcement and the community since 2012. So let me get him in here. Hey, Dan, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. So you are coming, where are you coming from exactly today?
I'm coming from the world headquarters in Missouri. So it's beautiful out. It's like 70 degrees today. It feels like spring.
Oh yeah, I know. It's slowly turning. The days are getting longer, right? You can tell when the days are getting longer. So that's great. I'm going to start asking you about your time as a state trooper. And I want to ask you about, we talked about or I mentioned at the beginning, narcotics, violent crime, and then human trafficking. But when you first began as a state trooper, what was your role, and how did that evolve into getting into the human trafficking?
So when I first became a trooper, I was in patrol, just like everybody starts off, answering calls, doing traffic, working accidents, going to domestic violence calls, whatever we would go to, 911 calls. And then eventually I got involved and became a detective in the narcotics and vice unit. And part of what we did in that unit was deal with vice related type crimes. So prostitution related crimes and things of that nature. And unfortunately, just like really with probably all law enforcement agencies at that time, that would have been the late 90s, 97 is when I started that. And we didn't have any training. And we literally were going out and arresting these girls, for prostitution related crimes on the street. And we really thought that we were doing them a favor. We were helping them, right? We were giving them something to think about their life choices. And we were helping the businesses. We were helping the community. We thought we were doing such a great job. Boy, looking back, we just didn't know anything.
Well, yeah. And so for example, were you kind of working on everything at once, or, were you sort of, focused in one area or another?
So we worked mostly narcotics crimes at that time, but we did do, vice related crimes when we started getting complaints from the community about various things. Sometimes we did John operations. Sometimes we did, the girl operations, or the what we refer to as victims now, because we clearly today have a different mindset of that. But at the time, we just called them prostitutes. And so yeah, we didn't do that all the time. We just did it whenever we started getting complaints.
Okay. And so, like, was there a moment like during that time where something just clicked and you said, I got you had a different perspective on things, or something happened where it was like, yeah, this is not what I was thinking it was before?
There actually was. I left their narcotics and vice unit and went to a violent crime unit. And while I was working in the violent crime unit, doing mostly homicides and things of that nature, I started seeing cases where these quote unquote traffickers, pimps, right? They were shooting at each other and killing each other. and a lot of times over girls. And I'm thinking, wow, this is, they're killing each other over these girls. I didn't really understand how much money was involved at the time, because again, we didn't have any training, and I didn't understand how much money was involved and what goes into that. And there was one particular time when we were working this case, and I went to talk to this girl in a parking lot, and she had this person with her who I thought was probably her. We didn't call them traffickers then, we just called them pimps then, and probably her pimp. And I'm talking to her, and she's uncooperative. She's not telling me. I'm clearly, she's probably a victim. She's not telling me she's a victim. I'm using all of my, interview and interrogation techniques, so to speak. None of it's working. It's completely a failure. And ultimately, I get frustrated. She's getting frustrated. She's cursing at me, and she ends up I just release her, and I say, fine, whatever, go on your merry little way. And a couple months later, I get a call from local law enforcement, and they're like, hey, do you know this girl? And I'm like, yeah, I just talked to her a couple months ago and whatever. And they're like, well, we found her today. She was dead in a bathtub in one of these rent by the week hotels, and no sign of foul play. She clearly cut both her own wrist. She was a cutter. She had all kinds of other cuts up and down her wrist from trauma. And there was, on the lip of the bathtub, there was a little photo of a little boy, like probably around 2 or a year, or something like that, small little boy. And they said that when we went and talked to her mother, their mother said, yes, that's my daughter, and said, yes, that photo is my grandson. He's here with me. And then she started relating to them the story of her daughter was molested from the time she was 7 to 9 by a family member. Mm-hmm. She never disclosed, so the parents didn't know. And during junior high and high school, she became kind of a troubled kid, didn't do well in school, started getting involved in drugs and alcohol, hanging out with older men, became that girl, right? And eventually she ran away. And the mother said, I didn't see her for 2 years until she got a call from the hospital that she'd had this child, this little boy, and the little boy tested positive for drugs. So social services was removing the child, and the grandmother went and took custody of the child. And she said, that was the last time I saw my daughter. And now she's dead in a bathtub. And that really kind of had an effect on me, because I'm thinking, I had her right in front of me, right? I had her. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to talk to her. I didn't know how to handle her. I didn't understand PTSD. I didn't understand trauma bonding. I didn't understand anything about how this works. And I let her down. And we're supposed to protect and serve. And I didn't do either one of those things with her. I literally let this girl down, and now she's 20 and she's dead in a bathtub. And I kind of had a realization that I did not want that to ever happen again. And then I had to start figuring this trafficking stuff out, because clearly we were not doing it right.
Okay. It was interesting. So when you first met this young woman, did you have a sense that something was wrong, like right from the beginning? Like you're like, there's something not right here? Because I've seen other people say a similar thing. Like they don't know what it is, but they know something is just not right.
Yeah, I could tell. I was somewhat confident that she was quote unquote in the game or the lifestyle. In other words, she was probably involved in prostitution, and she was younger. And this man that she was with was significantly older than her. He was a career criminal. Just the way the mannerisms between the two is kind of clear. I mean, looking back now, it's pretty easy to see all this, but that he was probably she was in a controlling situation. In other words, he was wanting to control what she said and where she went and things like that. But I didn't really realize all that at the time. Like you said, something's not right. This isn't right. I can't explain it. I don't understand it all. Now it's easy to look back and explain it. But at the time I didn't know that, but it clearly was not right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the problem, just the whole problem of human trafficking for a second. If we speak in terms of the scope and the size, how big of a problem is this, let's say globally? Like, is it, because like the normal person, you go about your day, whatever, maybe you'll see, you might see some gangster guys or whatever, but unless you're sort of involved in that world, like for me anyway, like, it's just, I'm oblivious to what's going on. But how big is this globally?
There's all kinds of different numbers out there, and I don't know how much emphasis we can put on all the numbers, because there's governments like, like China, for example, that are not going to give you accurate information. But what we do know is that it's pretty clear that it is probably the second largest criminal enterprise in the world behind the trafficking of drugs. It's worth billions and billions of dollars a year. We know that, for instance, in the United States, just in the illicit massage side of human trafficking, there's about 11,000 illicit massage businesses, give or take, in the United States, and that's worth about $4 billion a year. I don't know the numbers in Canada, but it's clearly a lot. I mean, every time I've been in the greater GTA area, there's illicit massage businesses all over the place, and we drive by them every day. And then you start throwing in all the other stuff, all the online stuff and everything else. It's a significant problem.
Yeah. Are there, you mentioned China before, but are there certain countries that are known to be, just where human trafficking is runs rampant?
Yeah. So again, we don't have accurate numbers from China, but Asia is definitely a hot spot. I mean, Pakistan, India, China, all those countries, there's a lot of, not only sex trafficking, but labor trafficking that's going on there. And like I said, just in the United States, 11,000 illicit massage businesses. And if you think that each one of those illicit massage businesses has between 2 and 4 girls that are, basically, I use the term working there, but we both know they're working there against their will. 2 to 4 girls at every one of those 11,000 places in the United States, just right there is, 40,000, possibly 40,000 trafficking victims.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how, or let me ask you, we talked before just briefly about the movie Taken and stuff like that. And oftentimes people imagine, a young woman is abducted and then she's, forced into, prostitution or something like that. But that's not always the case, right? So what are some of the common scenarios that you've seen, here in North America?
So the movie Taken we just very seldom ever seen that's just not what we see in a human trafficking situation. And if you think about it, it's common sense, because if I'm a trafficker and I kidnap somebody off the street, this person is kicking and fighting and scratching and trying to get away from me, and now I've got to control her to some degree and get her to go out and do what I want her to do to make money for me, right? And a victim in the United States is worth about $200,000 a year to a trafficker. So it's big money. If I have 5 girls working, that's $1 million. So it's big money. So what traffickers do is they quote unquote groom, and they look for vulnerabilities in people. Nowadays, that's mostly done online, and they look for people that are vulnerable. They look for people that are having, issues. They look for people that are in situations that they can exploit. And then they exploit those people, and they, groom them to where this victim thinks that they're going to something that is better than where they are, because maybe they're in a really bad situation. And then it turns out to not be better. In fact, most of the time it turns out to be significantly worse than where they were. So that's where most of the victims nowadays come from. They're runaways, they're kids in the foster care system, they're kids with vulnerabilities. And most people think that that's just like poor kids, but it could be rich kids too. I've seen rich kids that, they're being taken care of by a nanny, and mom and dad are never around. And consequently, they have those vulnerabilities. And then they get, groomed and recruited. And next thing you know, they're in a really bad situation. So it's not necessarily an economic thing. It's not necessarily a race thing or even a gender thing. It's strictly about those vulnerabilities. That's what we look for, and that's what the traffickers look for.
So do the victims, like I read somewhere that sometimes the victims fool themselves into thinking that, they're in control, or for example, maybe they don't understand exactly that they're being trafficked. Have you seen that, or do they know? Like, do you find that, yeah, they know something's wrong?
No, I think most of them do one or two things. Some of them just don't even know. They think maybe they're in love with this person, and this person is just asking them to do a few things until they can get ahead financially, and then they can get married. Only that never happens. Or you have people that, like you said, they just can't admit it to themselves. And I've had plenty of of victims tell me that if I was ever to admit that to myself, I don't know that I could have survived it. I would have, committed suicide or overdosed, which many of them do. And then there's some of them that just really don't know. I've had them literally tell me I did not understand that I was being trafficked because I thought trafficked was like the movie Taken. And I'm thinking, I'm not chained to a bed and a radiator. I'm not chained in the basement. So I can't be being trafficked. Now, my trafficker is beating me. My trafficker is forcing me to do this, but that's not what I see on TV. So that I'm not a trafficking victim.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what is the profile of a typical victim? So, for example, like it seems like the majority are going to be younger people. Is that fair to say?
So there's all kinds of stats out there, and there's you don't always know, but generally many times when these victims are brought into a trafficking situation, most of the time they're juveniles. So they're anywhere in that 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old range when they're first brought in. Now sometimes adults are brought in, but generally it's in that juvenile range is when it starts for them, and then it just continues on.
Okay. And who are, I mean, the clients, okay, or the Johns or whatever you want to call them? Like these are people from all various backgrounds, or is there also a certain profile that typically fits?
No, there's really not any type of profile for the Johns. They come from a lot of different backgrounds. They can be, many of them are just normal people. They're married, they got kids, and they've got, some issue that they want to not necessarily resolve, but they want to deal with. In other words, they have some fantasy that they want to maybe fulfill, or they have some, some sexual act that they want to do, but they would never ask their wife or their girlfriend to do that because it's, something that's completely non-traditional. I mean, by non-traditional, I don't mean just, I mean something like really weird, right? For example, transgender kids are worth 3 or 4 times more than what a normal female or male would be, because there's a certain segment of the population that wants to experiment with that, and they're willing to pay more for that. It's a supply and demand kind of thing. They want to experiment with that, and they could never do that at home, so that's what they do. And then they look for things that they can gravitate to satisfy these sexual desires and these sexual fantasies that they have.
Right. And earlier on, like I was reading about, or when I was doing the introduction, I had mentioned some of the places or that you have spoken at, and so casinos was one of them. And I thought, okay, so where are these activities typically taking place?
Casinos are a big one. We refer to these spots as funnel points. So a truck stop would be a funnel point. During COVID, truck stops were all open because they were essential workers, right? And truckers were still moving products and doing all that great work that truckers do to allow us to be able to have great lives. But a lot of, hotels were closed, casinos were closed, those places were closed, but truck stops were still open. So truck stops became the funnel point where all these girls were working. So we were super busy at truck stops during COVID. Now, when COVID kind of went away and you started seeing the casinos open back up, there's still stuff at truck stops, just like there always has been, but you saw them going back to the casinos, they going back to the hotels, the illicit massage businesses, those kinds of places. So there's a variety of these funnel points that you can find this kind of activity on.
Do you think that COVID had any impact at all on the business or the operation? Did it increase or did it get worse or better? I don't know.
So it had 2 effects. It started off really decreasing it. And when you start looking at, well, why is that? I mean, clearly the traffickers don't care about COVID. The girls that are being trafficked are forced to do it, so they're not really worried about COVID. So why did it drop so much? And the reason that it dropped so much is, think about it. All the men that are going, and this is mostly men that are doing this, how are they getting away from the wife and the kids to be able to go? They're at home, right? They're not even at work, so they can't say, honey, I got to go to a meeting or I got to go do this. They're at home. How do they get away so much? And it's most things are closed. So if you say, honey, I got to go here, I got to go there, You can't even say I'm going to the gym because the gym is closed. So the wife is going to know. So it's that part of it really slowed down. But the traffickers, I mean, they're entrepreneurs, they're criminal entrepreneurs, but they're entrepreneurs. So they realized I've got to still make money. So they started moving the girls to camming and online stuff. And that's when places like OnlyFans and places like that just blew up, because now you have all these girls that are doing all these live peep shows and camming shows. And they started having these Johns that were paying, memberships to see all this stuff and to do all this stuff. So some of it slowed, but then some of it picked up in another area.
Right. I want to talk about the investigative side and what tools law enforcement agencies have at their disposal. And one of the things that I've been reading over and over and over again is the lack of training and the failure to recognize that these things are going on. So I just want to know, are there any like maybe some statistics or any studies that have been done there? And what has been your experience with respect to training of law enforcement agencies?
So some of the most recent research was a 2020 study where they polled law enforcement across the United States about human trafficking training. And in that study, about 17% of law enforcement stated that they had human trafficking training. Unbelievably, about 2/3 of law enforcement admitted that they had not had human trafficking training, and that most of what they knew about human trafficking came from either television or social media. And we clearly know that everything that's on social media is true, and everything that's in the Hollywood movies are true. So basically, you have law enforcement in a position that they just don't know what to do. And how do you expect them to be successful at something that they haven't been trained in? And I saw that over and over, and I still see that as we travel around the North America and train law enforcement. I just came back from Idaho, and they had never received any training there, and they just don't know. And what you see almost every time is that after the training, they will come to you and say, I missed this, and I feel horrible about it because I let these victims go down the road or whatever. I just didn't know. I didn't know what this meant, and I didn't know what to do. And they feel bad about it.
Well, I've noticed that there are a lot of websites globally and even like resources. Like I was surprised actually in Canada that each province here has a number of different places you can call if you're a victim or if you suspect that there's human trafficking going on. But I didn't see a lot in terms of concrete training, like like this is what you do, or this is how it can be avoided. So when did you first get the idea to start the the human trafficking training?
So I had done some training while I was still working for the government, and as we started training officers in our state, we saw how quickly that training provided fruit, right? And literally within 6 months to a year and a half, we started seeing our cases. Well, our cases went from zero, honestly. I mean, let's call it where it is. We had 0 cases and 0 victims identified. To that first year, we went to like 40 cases and 6 victims, and then it went to 25 victims, and then it went to 47 victims. And within 3 years, we went from 0 cases to 385 cases. And it's not because that stuff wasn't always out there. It was. We just didn't know. We weren't looking at it correctly. I like to use the analogy that it's like it was happening in the dark, and we just only got the flashlight so that we could shine it in the dark once we got trained, and then we could see it.
I see. So were you just treating it like prostitution before? Is that what it was? Like,
yeah, we were just like, that's just us, just some prostitute, and whatever, and we just weren't really dealing with it that much, and we just didn't, and we didn't really know what to do about it. I mean, these girls, unfortunately, are not going to just come to the police and say, hey, I'm a trafficking victim, would you please help me? That's not how it works. So we didn't know how to talk to them. We didn't know how to interview them. We didn't know the indicators to look for. I mean, we just didn't know those things.
Yeah. And like at many law enforcement agencies, are the investigators, are they, like how much training do they really get? Like, so for example, there's a whole vice unit that's dedicated on something, or something like that. But is it just somebody within sex crimes that gets an hour of training kind of thing? What are you seeing there?
So in the United States, only 4% of law enforcement agencies have actual full-time human trafficking investigators. 4%. So most agencies do not even have that at all. So there is nobody that's to call necessarily to say, hey, I need a detective to help me on a human trafficking case. Most agencies don't have that. And in my case, when I first went into narcotics and vice, we got like 99% of our training was narcotics related, and like 1% was vice related. And really, it was just about how to arrest a prostitute. I mean, that was really the only training. There was no training whatsoever in, are these girls victims? How do we screen them properly? How do we properly interview them? How do we get them into victim services? How do we do all these things? And more importantly, why are they even out here in the first place? What vulnerabilities put them out here? Because in interviewing these girls over the years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, I have never interviewed a girl that was out there working the street that was not physically or sexually abused as a kid. Never once. Never once have I ever done that. And we just we never even thought about it. We never thought about, gee, maybe she was a victim as a child. Maybe she had all this horrible abuse happen to her. Maybe that's why she's out here. And I like to, again, you keep using all these analogies, but the analogy is, can somebody point to a woman somewhere that says, when I grow up, when I become an adult, if I can just be a prostitute, if I can just go out there and be a prostitute and have sex with strangers and get STDs and get involved in drugs and alcohol and maybe get picked up by a trafficker and get beat up and hurt and have all these horrible things. If I could just have that happen to me, I'll really have life licked, right? Yeah. Who says that? I mean, common sense wise, we should be able to figure that and the research is clear. These girls don't want to be out there.
Yeah, that's I think that's clear. In terms of the legislation, I believe in 2000 there was the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was released, and since then I've seen maybe like a few other little things. But is the proper legislation in place, in your opinion, that allows law enforcement to do what they need or to prosecute properly?
So it really depends. I mean, the federal government has certain, like you just talked about, certain legislation that they have out there. And then each state, just like in Canada, each province probably has different laws, concerning human trafficking and things like that. So some states in the United States are really, really phenomenal about having a lot of really good laws, a lot of really good tools to help the police. Some states don't. But there are states that also, like I know one particular state that they've passed a bunch of really good legislation and they have really good laws on human trafficking. But last year they had 0 trafficking cases in their whole state. And you go, well, how can that possibly be? Is there just no human trafficking there? And it's just like drugs. If you have people, you have trafficking. Just like if you have people that use drugs. That's just part of it. But when you look at why that state isn't doing anything, it's because their police officers aren't trained. So you created these really, really good laws, but then you didn't train the police on how to investigate and use these laws. So then they don't do it because they don't know how to do it. And it's kind of like having really good, rigid driving while intoxicated laws, but then you don't teach the police how to go find an intoxicated driver.
Yeah. Have you had any experience with, for example, international cases? Like, you got people that are, maybe, I don't know, bringing women over like internationally, or, maybe between Canada and the US, or maybe, Asia or whatever. But how about working, outside of just your state or the country?
So I have had some experience with like Chinese organized crime type cases with the illicit massage businesses with girls that come from, mostly China, honestly. I have had a couple of situations where we had, things going back and forth across the Canadian border. Those create an extra level of complexion, obviously, right? You would think that it would be as easy as, hey, OPP, what's going on? I got a case, right? Doesn't work that way. You got different governments, you got different people that you have to flow through properly, different liaisons everything has to work properly. In my case, I think it took me probably 2 weeks before I could actually finally get to the right person in Canada. And that actual person, that actual detective that was doing work, and me, the actual detective on my end that was doing work, we actually got together, but it took like 2 weeks.
I see. Okay. In terms of spotting and identifying, whether the victims, let's say, a lot of the frontline officers are going to be the ones that are, doing their patrol, or they run into these things regularly. So what are some of the things that you teach them to recognize? Like, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that you can say, hey, look, if you see this or this, like, you better start thinking about, your next move, kind of thing?
So probably the easiest thing for most people to see is, again, just something that doesn't look right. So like after 9/11, we started teaching people, if you see something, say something. And in the human trafficking world, what does that look like? And that looks like when somebody is just not in control of what's going on around them. In other words, somebody else is maybe holding them by the arm and kind of lightly guiding them. They won't look at you in the eye. Someone else is speaking for them. Maybe somebody else is holding their identification. Someone else is holding all the money. Little things like that are usually a really good indicator. And then something as simple as certain tattoos. The victims will have certain tattoos. The traffickers will have certain tattoos. You can see a specific type of tattoo, and it's kind of a no-brainer to go, okay, I need to call somebody about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's as easy as that, and just teaching, officers, the different tattoos. Those are a real telltale sign. I mean, you would not think this, but so one of the common tattoos that we see all the time in gang members that are trafficking girls is they'll have this crown on the girl, and they put their street name under the crown, right? So whatever their street name is, Big Eugene is your street name, right? So underneath the crown is Big Eugene, and that's them marking their property. That's them saying, this is my property, and telling the other pimps to stay away from her. She's worth 200 grand a year to me. That's my property, right? I'm going to control her. I'm going to keep her. And it also gives her that idea, because they're constantly holding them down, right? That you belong to me. Mm-hmm. Until I let you go, you belong to me. So that's an easy sign to see.
I saw once there was a victim that had like a dollar sign tattooed on her inner groin. I saw that one too.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of dollar signs. They'll mix a lot of dollar signs in there. The gang members a lot of times will put tattoos on themselves. And I see like the dollar sign mixed in with like the letters MOB, which means money over bitches. And so they'll have like, MOB with dollar signs around it and stuff like that. That's a pretty common tattoo to see in the trafficking world.
Yeah. So what is your perspective on this thing, like over time? I mean, you've been doing this for a while, and you've been sort of noticing it for, some time now. So has this gotten better because of the laws and because of some of the training, or is it stayed the same? Has human trafficking grown? Is it getting worse? Like, what's your opinion on sort of the state of human trafficking?
I think we are in a law enforcement perspective. I think we are in an early stage, and by that I mean, in probably the two easiest ways to relate it is for people that are older. If you can remember a time when law enforcement handled domestic violence significantly differently than how we handle it now. There was a time that we would show up and the husband's punched his wife in the face, and law enforcement would be like, so what'd you do to make him mad? You know what I mean? And if you don't like it, leave. And we completely did not handle those things correctly. Prior to Columbine, we handled active shooters completely differently, right? We sent a SWAT team there. We surrounded the place. We, negotiated. We did all that stuff. And we realized we can't do that. If there's an active shooter there, we got to muster up and we got to go in and we got to stop that threat, and we got to do that immediately. I think that's where we are in human trafficking. I think we're in that early stage, to where we're realizing what we're doing has not worked for 100 years. It's time to change that. We've got to get our law enforcement officers trained, and we've got to be victim centered, and we got to realize that they're victims, and we got to have services for these victims. We got to get them out of this lifestyle. We got to help them, and we got to do all those things. And when we do all those things, we end up arresting the traffickers more often. We end up making the community safer. We end up helping these victims. And if we do a really good job with prevention, like in schools and things like that, we can head off future possible trafficking victims, because we can look for all those kids that are vulnerable and have these vulnerabilities, and we can maybe try to head those off, before they get there. So I really think we're kind of in this early stage, and I'm hoping 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and go, wow, we made so much progress, and trafficking is so much different now because we were really able to stop so much of it. And we can, talk about the early stages when it was so much more complicated and we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah. When you said about the, today's like kids and stuff, and I was just thinking about how kids today are online so much. I was just thinking about the online aspect of this whole thing. Like, are some kids being solicited online for these kinds of things?
Yes, everything happens online nowadays. So in the old days, you go to a casino and there's some girl like walking the casino floor, right? And everybody could tell, okay, she's probably a working girl, right? Or a truck stop. Those days are kind of over. Now everything is online. The online escort ads, everything is online. The kids are being groomed online. The kids are being recruited online. And then they move them. And then once they get them, the ads are all online. Unless you have a Blade or a Boulevard in your city, which, some cities do and some cities don't, but unless
Oh, I think I might have lost Dan. We're just going to stand by here for a second and see if he bounces back here. But right now it looks like he's been cut off. So not sure if anyone's in the chat window there, but if you do have any questions there, folks, please type it in the chat window, and I'll make sure that when Dan comes back, we'll be able to get some of that information to him. Also, while we're waiting, I'm going to just point out that if you want to get over to Dan's website here, he's under Human Trafficking Training Center.com. And if you go to his website, he's got a bit of information there about himself and also some of the people who are there. So actually, if he gets back on here, I'm going to be asking him about his colleague, Allison Phillips, when we get a chance. And I think he's going to bounce back here in just a second. So let me just go back here. There is a question. So Madi, let me just make sure that I get back home here. This is one of the problems when you're live. Things can go pretty hairy sometimes right away. So let's see here. What are the major apps the juveniles use where human trafficking is good? That's a great question, actually. I will make sure that I pass that along, see if he knows. Nowadays, you never know. In fact, I have some answers to that because I did some research on that, but I'm going to wait and see if Dan will get back. Let's see here. What else did I have? Let's look here. See if Dan's going to get back. I'm going to see if I can message Dan here and see if he's totally stuck. All right. Yeah, I noticed also Dr. Amber Riley. I think she's there, and it's interesting that you said that you know Dan as well. So that's interesting. Well, and I didn't realize that this was a topic area of yours too. Yeah, if that's something you're interested in, that'd be kind of interesting to know. And let's see here. What else was there? There were a couple of things that if people are interested, this one here was an NIJ report, National Institute of Justice, and it talks about federally backed human trafficking task force model yields progress and opportunities for continued growth. This here is what I'll do is I'll grab the link, and I'm going to put this into the chat window while we're waiting here. And let me put that in there. And if anyone's interested, you can go there and you can have a read as to some of the things that they found in this particular study. And it looks at sort of the different law enforcement agencies and such, and how well they sort of are familiar with human trafficking. And so it's a pretty good report. There's also another one that I'll bring up. I thought was a really good study. In fact, I'll bring this up here for those that are interested. There you go. All right, here it is. So this one here was actually had a lot of really good information as well. So let me go back up here, right to the top. Local law enforcement officers' knowledge of human trafficking, ability to define, identify, and assist. And so this one here goes through a number of interesting points and topics. And one of them, I think, was that when talking about federal trafficking and victims protection, they define it as defines this crime. Human trafficking includes three specific aspects: the act, the means, and the purpose. And so the act encompasses recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person. And so it talks about like force or fraud or coercion. And so there's some definitions in here that could be interesting to somebody that want to look at that as well. There's some other interesting points here when talking about the frontline officers who are looking at this. And so one of the things they say is frontline officers are the most likely to come across this crime in the course of their everyday duties. And that kind of makes sense. And so those are obviously the people that need to be trained and need to be familiar with this type of crime for sure. Other things here that as I was kind of going through, let me see if I can find it. But I had some things in my notes. So it said here, as of 2014, only 32 states mandated or even encouraged training of law enforcement officers on this type of crime, which is talking about, again, the need for training and better understanding. And I'm just going to see here if, oh, wait a second. I just got a message here. So let me see if I'm going to be able to take care of this. Okay, so I just got a message saying that the internet went all the way down with Dan. So his whole area just went down. So it's not just him; it's the whole area. So this is what happens when you go live. But I am going to continue here because I'm going to wait for him to get on, and I'm going to give him a chance to get back on. So if all of you wait, what I'll do afterwards is I can always edit the video, but no big deal. This is the way it goes. So some questions here. Well, on the apps, let me talk about this. So Marty asked about what are the apps that juveniles use where human trafficking is significant. And some of the ones that I saw actually were WhatsApp, Facebook. So what's the other one there? It wasn't TikTok. It was actually something else, but Discord and different ones like that. So a lot of the common ones that we all use regularly even. And so that's kind of interesting. The other thing too is that a lot of times the victims will know the traffickers, and so as a result, you think that maybe it's like somebody foreign or somebody that they don't know or whatever. But oftentimes, what they say is that they try to establish a relationship with that particular person, and so of course the majority of these are young women. Of course, there's young men too that get trafficked, but the majority are likely young women. And so what happens is they promise money, or they promise support, they promise care, they buy things. So there's sort of monetary things, material things, and then all of a sudden it turns into something else, obviously. And unfortunately, sometimes they feel like they have to pay back, or sometimes they feel that they're going to end up in a worse place if they don't do what the traffickers are telling them to do. So let's see here. He's trying to get back on here. He's messaging me in the background. So yeah, this Wi-Fi here, this is what happens. So other than that, now I don't know if any of people in the audience here have any experience with trafficking or that sort of thing in their particular city. But it sounds like the massage parlors and such are a big one. But let's see, I'm just going to give him a couple more minutes. So you know what, folks, stand by, and I'm going to see if Dan is going to be here. So let me just remove this here. He's doing his best. So let me message him and let him know that I'm still on here. I haven't given up on him. Yeah, haven't given up, Dan. He's going to try his mobile tethering. Hopefully he can get back on. Usually it'll work well enough. so I know he's there. Other than that, let me close that and get rid of that. Yeah, and I think that's all I really have to say here until Dan gets back on. So, what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm just going to put Dan's screen on for a second. If you can keep this in the background for just a couple of minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and work with him to make sure that this gets back on. And then, if not, hey, we'll call it there. These things happen. I may continue the end of the interview with him, and then what I'll do is I'll just record it and then put it up online at another time. So let's see what happens. So what I'm going to do is let me put up his website just very briefly here. Right over here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove myself for a moment and just stand by, and I will be back in a bit. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm back here. Actually, I've got Dan on the phone. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to see if I can get this across. Oh, you know what? I think he just popped on again. Here, let's try this, Dan. All right. All right. I think we made it. Hey, Dan. All righty. Look at that. And I'm looking at the screen here. Everybody held on, which is great. Yeah, everybody held on, which is great. So that's good.
That was exciting.
Yeah, it was. That gave us a 5-minute reprieve here. So
apparently there was something wrong with the internet tower in our area, and everybody lost all their internet.
Oh, well, a little bit of video editing, and that'll just come right back together. No problem. But I forget where we were now, what we were talking about at the moment. But I think what I'll do is I'll go back. I did mention a few things while you were out, but I think I may have talked about some of the, or I may have asked you about, how things have progressed over time, and kind of things. Or we did talk about online. I think we were talking about like some of the kids that were like online. That was a thing. And maybe what I'll do is let me put up, do you mind if I put up a couple of questions or so?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. This is one from Mari. Mari's she's in Florida. And she asked about apps and different, maybe different platforms that some of these kids are being solicited from. Are there any in particular that you know of, or just any and all are fair game?
There's tons of apps that they use. Honestly, Facebook is still king. I know everybody thinks, oh, Facebook's not, kids aren't on Facebook anymore, but around 65% of trafficking victims were solicited on Facebook. So the first place that I always tell people to go as a patrol officer or a detective or whatever is go look on their Facebook Messenger. You can go to Snapchat and all those other places. And of course, you know, Instagram, they'll push you from Instagram to OnlyFans, and there's Kick, and there's TikTok, and there's all these other places, but Facebook is still king.
Okay. Another question from Brian Robertson. He's asking you about how did your agency receive cases, and how did you seek out cases proactively? If so, how?
So the answer to that is both. We receive, once you get patrol officers trained, we got a bunch of cases from patrol, because patrol would be the ones going to DV calls that turns out weren't just DV calls, or attempted suicides or overdoses or whatever. So a lot of these cases would come from patrol or traffic stops, right? But then we picked up cases from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. We picked up cases from truck stops once we went around and talked to them. We picked up cases from casinos. We picked up cases from probation and parole, from hospitals. Hospitals are a great funnel point. About 88% of all trafficking victims roll through the medical system while they're being trafficked. And here's the scary stat: only 4% are identified.
Wow. In terms of your training courses, I wanted to ask you about Allison Phillips, because she's come up before quite a bit. So is she like one of your main partners on this?
She is. She's the co-founder with me, and she worked at the Attorney General's office, and that's how we got to know each other. She's been in the trafficking place a long time, and she's amazing. She's great with people, and she's a fantastic partner. She's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to human trafficking.
Yeah, she seems very passionate. I've seen some of her talks and such, so she seems very passionate about what she's doing, or what you're both doing right now as well. So, what can you tell me, Dan, about your training? Like, what is it that you offer a law enforcement agency? Like, how long is it? What kinds of things do you cover? What can you tell me about the training that you have?
So we have different kinds of training, but really our big four training cases is our human trafficking interdiction class, which is kind of the foundation of everything. And that enables that paradigm shift where we get away from thinking about these girls as prostitutes and junkies and hookers, and we start looking at them as victims, and we explain why they're victims. We get into that whole mindset and where they came from. And then we have an investigators class, which is kind of like the next step of, okay, now I've located a victim. What do I do with them? I've located this trafficker. What do I do? How do we investigate this? What kind of subpoenas do I need to do? What kind of search warrants do I do? Where do I look for all my evidence? How do I present that to a prosecutor? And then we have a class on proactive operations, which is kind of one of the questions that I think Brian was asking about, doing proactive ops at truck stops, at casinos, at hotels, working a blade, you know, all those kinds of places, looking for victims and looking for those traffickers. And then lastly, these are our main four, is what we call the special victims methodology. So for years, I tried to figure out why we are so bad in law enforcement at getting these victims to talk to us. It's about 7% across the nation of girls are going to disclose, or victims are going to disclose that they're being trafficked. So we tried for years to make that better. And it was failure after failure after failure after failure after failure. And finally, we came up with it was really an accident. You know, it's like finding plutonium by accident. And we found out a way to do it, which increases that to about 50%. And now we're taking that and we're teaching that across the country, so that when you interview these trafficking victims, if you do it the old fashioned way that we've all been taught, it just doesn't work. And this is a new way to do it, which really increases that, what you need to help that person, to get them services, and to probably prosecute your case, because most prosecutors do not want to prosecute a case without a victim.
Right. With respect to the victims, and you had mentioned this or alluded to it earlier, but the victim, like the kinds of services that are available for victims, has that, like, what was that like, 15, 20 years ago versus today? And is it enough?
I think as law enforcement continues to get training and is finding more and more and more victims, we are going to quickly overwhelm the service providers that we currently have. The ones that we have, I think, are doing a pretty good job. they clearly need more help, but I think we'll quickly overwhelm them within the next 5 years. And I hope to. Honestly, I hope that we do overwhelm them, because that means that we are finding more victims and we are trying to get them help. So that's a really good problem to have.
I see. Somebody's asking here, how much ritual abuse have you come across in your career? I'm not sure exactly what that means, but
You mean like ritual abuse? I'm assuming they're talking about like maybe like cults and voodoo and that kind of stuff. And the answer to
maybe.
that is not very much at all. Just
Hmm.
we just don't see that very often.
Yeah. And like a lot of these people who are victims, I mean, they have very long lasting effects. It's PTSD. I mean, they've been physically abused, they're mentally abused, and everything else. So the road is long for a lot of these people to recover and get back on track. So um, do most states have a a place where people can recover from something like this?
I don't know of any states that have like, and by that I mean like where the government provides that. All the victim services that I know are generally privately funded,
I see.
faith-based, a lot of faith-based groups and other stuff. And there are places. We have one in Missouri that's a great one. And they these girls can stay there up to 2 years. I mean, all the way from where they first are located, and with and they have different levels on this. It's like a farm outside of town, and they have different houses, and they provide them with, they'll send them to rehab, they'll send them to counseling, they'll get them all the services that they need. They'll help them with, education and building a resume and learning how to get their driver's license back, and all that stuff that they need so they can become a productive person in society. And it's awesome when you see it work. It's awesome when you have, I had one girl that I found who was not very friendly to me, honestly. And she was at a hotel, and it's a longer story I won't go into here. But 5 years later, and I'll hear from her a couple times a year, usually in a text message, and she's got a boyfriend. She lives in an apartment. She's clean and sober. She went to cosmetology school. She cuts hair, and that's what it's about. I
Hmm.
mean, being the police is not just about arresting everybody. It's about doing these other things too. And when you can help someone like that and get them out of a place where they're being trafficked, and here they are 5 years later, and she's got a boyfriend, an apartment, and a job, and everything is good. I mean, what do we
Yeah.
do that's better than that?
Yeah. Yeah. Giving people a life back, right? I mean, that's really what it's about.
Yeah.
Um, what do you see in the future with respect to different types of tools, or just what would you like to see in the future for things that can help reduce human trafficking?
So, technology plays a part. You're a tech guy. You're into all that. So there's things like chatbots. I don't know if you're familiar with how law enforcement is utilizing like AI and chatbots into reducing the demand. That's a big thing. Going after traffickers, going after Johns, doing it in a smarter way, so that you don't have to have 10 detectives sitting there online. You actually have AI that's doing it. And once you get to a certain point, then that information rolls to a detective. I mean, I think that's stuff like that is really going to be a wave in the future that we can, have a bigger impact.
Yeah. So Dan, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I just want to just don't know, is the best place to just get to your website, or how can they reach you?
Yeah, you can email me, which my email is easy. It's just Dan at humantraffickingtrainingcenter.com. You can also reach out to us on the website. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on LinkedIn. We're all over the place, and you can call if you're interested in a training, or if you just have some questions and want some help in with a case or whatever you need.
Excellent. Hey Dan, I just want to say thanks so much. Appreciate you being here and giving you all the input and stuff like that. It was a great topic, actually. Something I haven't ever touched on, and it's great to see the work that you're doing. And yeah, I hope in the future I can have you back on.
That'd be great. I'd love to do that. And thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for having me. Sorry about the technical difficulty in the middle.
No worries at all. All good. All right, hey, hang back for a second. I'll come back and chat with you in a little bit. All right, folks. Well, that one does it. So a little bit of a hiccup, but hey, that's what happens when you go live. This is the live streaming issue, right? So you can't control the internet or whatever. But anyway, hey, look, I want to thank everybody for your patience. I saw a whole bunch of you hung on there, which is fantastic. So I really appreciate it. I want to say thanks. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.